This is one of the most convoluted cases I've ever covered. A house party in Brooklyn led to a murder in the middle of the street. However, most witnesses refused to talk. In fact, investigators had to have a grand jury subpoena those involved in order to find the truth. Yet it's believed that the man convicted may not have been the killer, or may have not done it alone. In order to find the truth, one mother with zero experience in the field went undercover for a year. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Mckenna, but today's case is about the mom who went undercover to clear her son of murder. But is he guilty? Now, I also want to thank our sponsor, Animal Kingdom, who allows me to continue creating these videos. Now, Animal Kingdom Coin Raid has been my newest favorite app. Now, Animal Kingdom Coin Raid allows you to collect coins by building bridges and exploring the kingdom. And meanwhile, you are actually creating your own island with these coins and moving on to each level, which gives you a whole new island to create. Now, this game actually requires you to be quite attentive, which helps me when my mind is wandering at night. Now, you can download Animal Kingdom Coin Raid for free on Android and iOS, and if you use my link down below to download, you will get a special welcome bonus. If you don't know, it's my absolute passion to tell these stories. I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so, so if you'd like to support me in doing that, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a nice comment down below. Also, if you would like to follow me on Instagram at Brooke Mckenna, I post short little true crime stories on there as well. Now let's get back to the story. It was 2003 in Connecticut, and Mark Fisher lived in Fairfield, Connecticut. He was going to the Fairfield University, and there he was actually a sophomore in college studying to be an accountant, and he was also a football star at the same time, all while being on the dean's list. Mark had been born November 8th of 1983 to his parents Michael and Nancy. He had an older brother named Michael and a younger sister named Alexis. Now, from a young age, he was known to be unselfish, respectful, and very talented at sports. He actually played Little League, and he was even voted the most valuable player at a very young age, and this wasn't due to an easy time. These things didn't come easy to him. He had to work for them because he was asthmatic, and he also had flat feet, and he had allergies, so just being outside was really tough for him. So it wasn't like he just was this natural born, didn't have to fight for what he got kind of guy. Growing up, he was known to be a great individual. He would volunteer on his own at the local church as well as for the Special Olympics, and his classmates would call him Fish and would eventually vote him to be the prom king senior year. He was widely popular, and he also had no problem getting into his first choice college, which was Fairfield University. He had been on the National Honor Society, which is basically like having straight A's, being on the dean's list. It's just another title like that showed that he was a very good student, and he was also the star football player, so he would go on to get great scholarships. While in college, Mark also worked at the recreational center on campus to make some money, and in 2003, Mark was this 19-year-old sophomore, good-looking guy standing at 6'4", and he loved to go out, meet girls, to party, and he loved to do so in the nightlife of New York City. Now, this is what he was doing with his friends on the night of October 11th. However, at 6:40 a.m. the next morning, police would be called to a road in Brooklyn because residents there on Argyle Road had heard gunshots. Several of these calls were made. One said they had heard a female voice, and when they arrived at the scene, they found a male lying face down in the foot of a driveway. This man had been badly beaten, and he had shotgun wounds to his chest, his side, his back. His shirt was torn with some of the buttons missing. He had only $12 in his pocket, and there was no wallet to be seen, so they couldn't identify him right away. And the strangest part was that he was also wrapped in a yellow fuzzy blanket that was also bloodstained. Now, 2 .22 caliber shell casings were also found nearby the scene. Now, the medical examiner revealed that during the autopsy on this man, who they had now identified as Mark Fisher, it showed that he had actually been shot 5 times by this .22 caliber gun. Investigators were able to find an ATM receipt in his pocket saying that he had gone to this ATM around 5:23 a.m., so about an hour before he was found, and he withdrew $20. However, he did not have that $20 on him, he just had $12. Now, this meant that an hour before, he was very much alive, and his wallet would actually be found in a nearby sewer. So while looking for witnesses, investigators were going from house to house on this quiet street, and they found that a lot of these residents had actually heard these gunshots, and one had even looked through their bedroom window as the shooting began and saw a white car speeding away from the scene. Another said that they heard a man and woman kind of arguing just before the shots rang out. Another said that they heard the sliding door kind of like of the van, and then they looked outside and saw a dark colored van driving away. Now, all of these witness statements were a bit different, and all of these homes had their doors knocked on. At the same time, the media was starting to cover this case, and it was front page for weeks, calling this the Grid Kid homicide. Once the news of Mark's murder came out, his friends did come forward to talk to investigators. They were the ones who had gone with Mark that night to party, but had of course been separated from him. Now, they actually had already reported Mark missing before it came out that he had been murdered, because they were worried that they hadn't heard from him. He hadn't come home that night. Now, they would unveil the timeline for investigators of the events of partying that night. However, some of the events were fuzzy, as most of them were drinking. But it was said that Mark and his friends from college actually started on the Upper East Side at a bar called Bar Harbor. This is where Mark ran into a woman named Angel DePietro. She actually went to the Fairfield University as well. So they had a few classes together, they kind of knew each other, and they began to talk. And Angel was there with a whole group of her own friends, but one of these friends was named Meredith. She was this beautiful girl, and Mark instantly was intrigued by her, wanted to hang out with her more and talk to her. And so Mark's friends decided to leave him be with this girl and decided to go on, bar hopping and partying on their own. Now, it was said that Meredith and Mark would end up going outside for a little while. Mark was pretty drunk at this point. He didn't have much money left. He had already lost his cell phone, and he knew that he missed the last train back to New Jersey. So he really also had no idea how he was going to get home. So he was a bit upset, not knowing what to do, but he ended up staying with Meredith instead. Now, Angel and her friends were still inside of this bar, but two more of their friends had tried to come into the bar. This was two men named Albert Cleary and John Juka. Now, John Juka was only 20 years old, so he didn't have a fake ID. He couldn't get into the bar, and so he decided to throw a party at his home in Brooklyn. And he said that everybody was invited as this kind of after party. And so when the bars closed at around 2 or 3 a.m., everybody got in taxis and began to go to John's home. Now, this was at Stratford Road in Prospect Park South in Brooklyn. And this home was huge. It was about a 7-bedroom, and there was 0 adult supervision because John's mother was actually out of town. So when they arrived at this home, they realized that there were actually already people partying, that John had some friends who had already come over. And Mark didn't know anybody there, but Angel and Meredith were there with him, so he felt a bit more comfortable. And Mark was also one of those guys that could make friends with anybody in a split second, especially when he was drinking and having fun, so he didn't really worry about this. And at this point, everybody was already intoxicated, as well as some of them were high, and so nobody was really worried about this new guy. They were all just having a good time. So investigators decided to track down everybody who could have been at this party and see what they remembered or what they had seen. However, most of them wanted nothing to do with this. They kept quiet, refusing to answer anything, and some of them even lawyered up so they didn't have to speak. Now, one witness did come forward, and they said that John, the house owner, the one who had thrown the party, had gotten upset with Mark because Mark sat on his glass table and he thought it was going to break, and so he went up to him and he asked him to move to the couch, and he thought that it was disrespectful that Mark was sitting on the table. Another witness claimed that there was a fight with Mark and another guy at the party because this other guy also liked Meredith, who Mark was trying to, have a date with, and so Mark got upset and they began to fight. However, this fight was not believed to end in anyone getting hurt. Now, John was willing to talk, and he said that around 5 a.m. that morning after the party, that Mark was at his home wrapped in a yellow blanket, and he went to sleep on his couch. John said that he pretty much kicked Mark out about an hour later around dawn, and then Mark was killed only 2 blocks away from his home, with the same blanket that John was talking about coming from his home. However, investigators found that where he was killed was even closer to another member of this house party, and that was Albert Cleary. His mother's home was directly across the street from where Mark was murdered. Now, if you remember, Albert Cleary was the friend of Angel's and Meredith's who had gone to the bar with John, and then John couldn't get inside, so that's when they decided to have the after party. So he was involved from the very beginning. He also went to the party at John's home. But Albert was said to have left the party early that morning with Angel to go back to his mother's home to just sleep. Now, John said that when he kicked Mark out of his house, he had called Albert saying that Mark was going to head over there because the only person that Mark really knew at this point was Angel. So he was sending Mark over to Angel so that Angel could deal with him and get him back to where he needed to be. So this was almost 6 a.m. when John said that Mark began walking towards Albert's home with a blanket around his shoulders to keep him warm. Now, only about 40 minutes later, he would be dead. And when investigators started going from house to house, they had knocked on Albert's door, his mother's door, at around 9 a.m. and they did not get an answer. Nobody would come to the door. Eventually, Albert, Angel, and Albert's mother were questioned, and they claimed that they didn't hear gunshots at all that night. That even though every single other resident on the block had heard gunshots and had called the police, they had heard nothing being directly across the street. Now, Mark's college friends, whom he separated with when he was with Meredith that night prior, had said that they had tried to call Angel several different times to ask if she had any idea of where Mark was since he didn't return home. They claimed that she was acting very evasive and wouldn't give them a straight answer. And after multiple different people called her, they realized that she was giving different stories. Now, she was drinking that night. She could have been hungover, confused, but she told one that he was still at the party and another that he was getting a train back to New Jersey around 9 or 10 that morning. Now, Albert and Angel also told investigators that they had gone to John's home for this party, but it wasn't John who had told Mark to get off the table. It was actually a man named Tommy, one of their friends in the party. And Albert said that the entire night, Mark was very, very drunk. He was almost zombie-like, hardly talking to anybody. Now, Albert and Angel said that they both slept in until 11 a.m. Remember, they didn't hear the gunshots, so they just slept in after being out all night, and then Albert got up and he started cleaning the garage. However, investigators told Albert, we have John's statement that says that he called you around 6 a.m. to confirm Mark was on the way. Albert immediately said that didn't happen. Yet there was proof on their phones that a call did occur at that time for about a minute. And when investigators told him this, he said, "Oh, yeah, there was a call. I just didn't remember it." Again, it could be said that he was hungover, that he really didn't remember the phone call that he answered. It was groggy, he fell back asleep, and he has no idea of what occurred. But this Tommy was located that they were saying was the one who actually told Mark to get off the table at the party, and he said that, yeah, it was him. It wasn't John at all. Now, at Mark's funeral, his father went up and he began talking about Mark, and he said, "Mark never bragged about his accomplishments. He was a humble and modest person. He loved his mother and sister and admired his brother. He was a joker and a funny guy. He always made me happy in my life. Usually a son learns from his father. I learned a lot from him. My heart is broken. I will miss him dearly. Mark, no one will ever replace you, my son. I love you." At this point, investigators really had nothing solid to go on, so they went back and talked to John again. And they showed up at his front door, and at the same time, reporters were also showing up at his front lawn because the news of this house party was spreading. And so John actually allegedly called his mother Doreen and asked her to come home immediately. John told her that Mark was a good guy and actually began crying, talking about his murder. Now, a little about John was that he was a 20-year-old college student actually studying criminal justice. He dreamed of being a police officer, and a lot of the community kind of deemed him as this bad guy, this guy who got into a lot of trouble. However, he didn't have much of a criminal record. One of the only things on there was that a few months before the murder, John pled guilty to gun charges after getting into a fight and firing off a gun in the middle of the street. Not at anybody, I don't believe, but just kind of into the street. He did claim, though, that it was just fireworks and he had never actually shot a gun. Because John wasn't giving them anything more, they started to focus on the very small physical evidence they had, which was the ATM receipt that appeared to have occurred about an hour before Mark died. And so they were talking to some people and they found that this ATM run had occurred on foot. Mark was walking, and this was before he was kicked out of John's home. He was just taking a break from the party to go to the ATM. It was said to be around 5:30, and 17-year-old Anthony Russo, who was also at this party, had gone with him. Now, Anthony was known as Tweed in the community. He was a boy who dropped out of school and was making a living selling marijuana. He had been the one to actually bring the weed to the party so everybody could use it. It was said that Mark was going to this ATM with Anthony so he could buy some off of him once he got some money for himself, because like I said, he was very low on money at this point. So they were said to go to the ATM and return to the house party. Nothing was wrong. But they had looked a bit more into Anthony and they found that he wasn't in town anymore. He had actually immediately gone to his barber the next day and cut off all of his dreadlocks, which take years and years to grow. And he suddenly, the next day after this murder, decided he didn't want to look the same anymore. And he cut all of them off, and he also then took a plane to California. Of course, this made it even harder to question him, but they had spoke to him briefly before they knew he was even at this ATM with Mark. And when spoken to, he had actually pointed the finger at John, saying that John was in this gang called the Ghetto Mafia, or GM, and was allegedly one of the leaders. Now, looking into phone records, investigators found that Anthony and John didn't speak much over the phone. It's just they were friends in passing, but they didn't talk personally. You know, it was just a few times every once in a while. However, 24 hours after the murder, there were 26 calls between them. John said that this gang that Anthony was telling him about wasn't serious, that they kind of had this community of friends who had grown up together, but they didn't commit crimes. They would just, go around, hang out, and have names for themselves. They were called everything as kids, from Westminster Warriors to Strayford Stray Cats, and basically they just like to play pretend. John said that they were just using this one name that sounded worse than the others to make him appear guilty or like a bad person. But due to no evidence pointing to any of these suspects, investigators decided to start driving around these neighborhoods, canvassing the area with this police van, and they would actually announce over the speakers that if anyone had information about Mark Fisher, they needed to come forward. They were hoping that this pressure would make somebody who saw something speak. They were theorizing that Mark had actually been dragged out of this party, thrown into a vehicle where he was actually shot. They believed that there were multiple people around this time who were around him that wrapped him in a blanket and dumped his body. And as far as why there were gunshots where he was dumped, they theorized that these killers were worried that he wasn't actually dead, and so they shot him more. However, they had zero evidence backing this, and so 5 months later, with no answers, the DA actually pulled all the detectives off this case, and he set up an elite team of prosecutors and detectives from the NYPD. They completely ignored everything that the investigators had done prior, and they began focusing on just Anthony and John. Since even they couldn't get anyone to talk, they ended up putting together a grand jury in order to get answers. Now, this made it possible for anyone who could be involved to be subpoenaed to have to testify under oath, meaning they had to tell the truth or they could be prosecuted. Now, Albert was one of those who was brought in, had to speak, and he was actually cleared as a suspect at this time. I could not find why or how, but it is said that his mother did give him an alibi and he became the star witness. Now, 13 months after the murder, Anthony Russo was arrested at his home for Mark's murder. Now, his first words to investigators were, "Are you going to arrest the others?" However, when investigators were like, "The others, can you please elaborate?" he refused to, and he kind of just took back what he said. Now, investigators believed that robbery was the motive for murder for Anthony, and that the $20 he got from the ATM was what Anthony killed him over. Anthony was being charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, 3 counts of robbery, and a weapons charge. Now, he was questioned again, and he said that after Mark sat on John's table, that John was upset, and he was talking to Anthony and John's girlfriend, Lauren, saying that he was, thought it was very disrespectful, basically. And that is when Anthony said that John gave him a gun and said, "Show Mark what's up." Anthony said he then sent Mark over to Anthony to kill him. Now, Lauren was then spoken to at this point. She told police that John told her that Anthony went up to him and said he wanted a gun to rob Albert's friend, who was Mark. Lauren said that John never said anything about wanting to show Mark what's up or wanting him dead at all. However, 1 month later, John Gucca was arrested for the murder as well, but this was for providing Anthony with the murder weapon, and he was being charged with second-degree murder, first-degree manslaughter, robbery in the first and second degree, and criminal possession of a weapon. Now, although I told you that John didn't have much of a criminal record, it turned out that he began adding things after the murder. You see, it had been a year and 2 months since the murder at this time, but 10 months after the murder, John had been arrested, but this wasn't anything to do with Mark. You see, in July of 2004, John actually was shooting at a group of men while in Florida, but the charges were dropped. 2 months after that altercation, in September, John was arrested for selling narcotics on the street wearing a bulletproof vest. During the trial, John and Anthony were going to be tried together but with separate juries. Now, the prosecution argued that they did this because they were in this gang and that they went and killed Mark for street cred and because he was a rich kid. Now, Albert was more than willing to testify as their star witness and said that before the murder, John kept going up to everybody, showing off his gun and saying that his crew was getting soft and needed to get a body. Albert also said that John admitted to him to lead Mark out to Anthony, who had the gun. He said that Anthony then gave John back the murder weapon and told John to get rid of it after saying he was done. Now, Anthony began saying that John was actually the one who fired and killed Mark and he didn't have anything to do with it. But John's mother, Doreen, was very passionate about the fact that her son wasn't guilty, that he was being wrongfully convicted of murder. She had started the Free John Gucca movement and had a whole bunch of people wearing these shirts, holding these posters, and protesting all of this happening. Now, due to most of the evidence being circumstantial in this trial, they didn't have much. They didn't even have the murder weapon, but they did have phone records that showed that 3 minutes before the murder, Anthony had called John. Now, at this point, a jailhouse witness was brought in saying that John had confessed to his father about the murder, and he had overheard it. Now, this witness said that John said that he pistol whipped Mark and someone else grabbed the gun and killed him. Now, this didn't match anything that any of the prior witnesses were saying, and John said he didn't even speak to this guy, but this was kept in the trial, and it was one of the biggest testimonies used against John. This witness was also said to suffer from many different mental illnesses as well as addictions, and John's father, who he spoke to in that phone call, couldn't testify for his son because he had actually suffered a stroke and he couldn't speak. After 3 days of deliberation for Anthony and 2 hours of deliberation for John, they were both found guilty, and the jury said that they believed that John gave Anthony the orders to kill. The judge also said that it was a callous crime and that their reactions were callous, brutal, shockingly senseless, and that their sentence would be callous too. They were both then sentenced to 25 years to life, and at this point, John's mother, Doreen, jumped up and was speaking to detectives saying, "Are you happy now?" before being dragged out of the court. Now, the next year, what investigators didn't know was that John's mother, Doreen, was not going to let this rest. She decided to do an investigation herself. It was later described as a one-woman sting operation because that's how invested she got into this. You see, Doreen began looking into all of the jurors, and she'd acquired all of the paperwork, and that is when she found that a friend of John's who was in the courtroom, who had nothing to do with the actual trial or testifying or the jury or anything, recognized one of the men on the jury, which was a problem because the jury is supposed to be completely separated from the crime. Now, she ended up meeting with this man who said that he knew somebody on the jury, and he said that juror number 8, who was Jason Allo, always partied with the friends of John's, and that he knew pretty much everyone in that area, but it wasn't said that he actually knew John, but he lived in the neighborhood and he knew tons of people involved with this crime. But Doreen didn't just immediately go up to Jason and confront him. She actually began watching, following, stalking Jason for a year. She even dressed up in a burqa at one point to stand next to Jason and his friend who were talking outside just to hear what they were saying. And when she listened, she knew exactly what she was going to do next. Doreen dyed her hair blonde because she had overheard Jason say that he was into blondes. She changed her name to Dee Quinn, and she wanted to get herself into his life and get him to confess to her what he had done. She began wearing high heels, push-up bras, lots of makeup, and then she approached him. She had a tape recorder on every single time that they would have conversations, and she began to be his friend. And it wasn't long before he began talking to her. At this point, it was a year into the investigation that Doreen was putting on. She had a burner phone, a fake business card, and she even rented a bachelorette pad for a year to keep up appearances. Jason confessed to her one night that he actually hated John Juka for being Jewish, that he hated Jewish people, and that his boss also did and wanted to see the kid fry, so told him to find him guilty. What he didn't know was that his mother was standing in the kitchen, but also that John wasn't even Jewish. Now, Jason also allegedly admitted to Doreen that he withheld telling the court that he knew everybody involved in the case, and that he was the first juror to actually decide on the guilty verdict for John. Now, Doreen said that during this conversation she was actually making dinner in the kitchen, and she had to stop herself from stabbing Jason when he was confessing all of this. Now, these audio recordings were taped and they were sent to John's lawyer, who gave it to the judge of this case. And at this point, John had no idea what his mom was doing for him. However, this judge refused to accept the tapes as evidence, and he basically reprimanded Doreen, saying that she was reckless and shouldn't be a vigilante. Doreen went into this not even knowing that this could be jury misconduct. She was just believing that this could get her son out of prison, but it wasn't doing anything for her because this judge wouldn't even look into it. However, Doreen was very vocal about what she did, what she found out in different kinds of interviews, and so Jason was actually also interviewed by ABC News, saying that he was truthful in court, that Doreen had nothing on tape because he didn't confess anything, he didn't do anything wrong. Now, while John was in prison, he would do some interviews, and he really said that he believed that at first Albert was their prime suspect, and he didn't understand why that changed at all.
Not only did he change his story 3 or 4 times, but he got caught in numerous lies, and the body was found 50 feet away from his house. So, I mean, initially he's a suspect, turned into the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. I mean, how does that happen, right?
Albert was said to pass the lie detector test that he took, saying that he knew nothing about the murder. However, then when he became the witness, he knew a lot about what happened that night and what could possibly have happened with the murder, but his lie detector test said that he didn't. Albert was also found to be on probation during the time of the murder for drunk attacking 2 people outside of a bar to the point where they were unconscious and taken to a hospital. It was also found that Albert's mother had gone to their neighbor's home after the murder and was telling the neighbor not to tell the police anything about Albert. She later told a newspaper that Albert was home by 4:30 a.m. before they had even gone to the ATM. Yet witnesses would come forward saying it wasn't just Anthony and John who went to the ATM, it was Anthony, John, and Albert who went at around 5:30 a.m. and then returned back to the party. Now, John has been working with several different lawyers and reporters to discuss this possible wrongful conviction. And one of his childhood friends had actually become a criminal reporter and went to interview him in prison. John says the only reason that he is in prison today is because he had a party. And that the 4 witnesses that testified against him, 3 of them have recanted their statements, saying they were either forced or coerced into making these statements against him. His ex-girlfriend Lauren was one of them, and she came forward to say that police actually put a lot of pressure on her, threatening her that if she did not testify, they would make it very bad for her father, who was in jail. There was also that jailhouse witness who would later recant on stand, saying that he only did this to get a shorter sentence. He actually apologized to John in the courtroom, saying that he was coming forward because he felt so guilty. But Albert's statements have remained the same. Now, in these interviews, it does appear that John feels a lot of guilt as well. I mean, he says that he feels terrible for what happened to Mark and for the Fisher family, but they need to know that he didn't do this.
No, I had nothing to do with this crime. I did not murder Mark Fisher. I had nothing to do. All I did was have a party. All I did was have a party that night. And now I'm in prison for 25 to life for something I didn't do. I feel terrible for the Fisher family. I know what it's like to lose a loved one. And, but they need to know that I'm not responsible for this. They need to know that.
Now, 11 appeals had been denied. However, in 2018, John and Anthony had been in prison for 15 years when John would get his case to an appellate court. At this point, his conviction was actually overturned due to the prosecution's misconduct, and the judge said that the prosecution had erred by not telling the defense that they had basically given this jailhouse informant less time on his sentence in order for him to come forward. However, even though John was celebrating this, he was not released because the prosecutor said that they would appeal this, so he had to remain in prison. Now, while awaiting for the appeal, on March 22nd of 2018, investigators went back to Anthony to interview him once again. After an hour of questioning, Anthony would confess to basically doing this on his own. He said he used his own gun, which was a 9mm handgun, and he shot and killed Mark. That the morning after the party, when Mark was still there, he let him out the door because he was worried that John's mother was going to come home and see this random man still in her home. So Anthony said that he gave Mark the blanket, let him outside, and they began walking together. That once they got to Argyle Road, he took out the gun on his waistband and pointed it at Mark. He wanted Mark's wallet, and he actually told Mark to run while firing a shot at the ground to scare him. However, he then shot at Mark and he fell to the ground. And when Mark asked him why he shot at him, Anthony just continued firing. Anthony said that there was a woman in a car nearby who looked at him that could identify him as the killer. And at this point, everybody involved with John's case and trying to get it overturned and keep it overturned were very excited. His mother said, "My fingers are crossed. I knew this day would come someday because you just can't bury the truth. Now let's hope the wheels of justice turn a bit faster and grants John the freedom he deserves." John had also said, "If I am blessed with freedom, I will use this opportunity to prove Eric Gonzalez and all of the judges involved that I'm a decent human being and deserve to be exonerated." Now, the next year, even with this new confession from Anthony, the overturning of John's conviction was taken to the New York Court of Appeals. However, they reinstated his conviction and John remains on Rikers Island. There were also problems found with Anthony's confessions, such as he claimed he used a 9mm handgun. However, Mark had been shot with a .22 caliber. There were also not 16 shots or a ton of shots that had rung out like Anthony was saying. Now, Mark's family do travel to Brooklyn every year on the day that he was murdered and just to visit that area, and they believe that others were involved in the murder and they haven't been caught yet. Now, it appears that even though 2 men are in prison for this murder, we may not know what really happened. There may be 2 innocent men, there may be 1 innocent man who remain in prison for a crime they didn't commit. Do you believe John is guilty? What about Anthony? What about Albert? Did some people work together? Was it this huge group cover-up by a lot of people at that house party? Was Angel involved with this, as there was a woman heard speaking at this time? What about Meredith? No one really spoke in this case about what happened to her after they got to this house party, other than, she was there flirting with Mark and possibly this other man. Mark was murdered. He lost his life, and somebody did this. It was most likely someone at that party. But at the same time, the evidence, the theories, the different witness statements are all so scrambled that it's hard to tell if John is guilty or not. I do find it very interesting, though, that witnesses heard a female voice just after John had called Albert an angel to tell them that Mark was coming over. I find it very shady. I have seriously never heard of a more convoluted case, and I just don't know if there was enough evidence to convict these men. I think that's the most heartbreaking part, is that, you know, it's one thing to have somebody in prison for the murder of a family member of yours, but to know that the real killer might still be out there is just as horrific, because you know that that person is getting away with it. And it's just not right. I think what Doreen did for her son was going the extra mile, and something that I think that a lot of mothers would do if they believed that they could, you know, get away with it, and that they would be safe doing it, and that they could get their son out of prison. She truly believes that her son could have never done this. Anthony has confessed a lot of times to a lot of different things, but he has never tried to appeal, I don't believe. So that's why it's focused mainly on John and his wrongful conviction. But let me know if you believe there is a wrongful conviction. It's hard in a case like this where you want it to be solved. You want the men who did this to have been put away, and you want to trust in the criminal justice system. Sometimes that's not the best option to trust in a system that has failed us time and time again. It's interesting, and I wonder if there's going to be any more in this case, since John's appeal was overturned and he is now in prison again for 25 to life. But please let me know what you think, and don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Now you can download Animal Kingdom Coin Raid for free on Android and iOS, and if you use my link down below to download, you will get a special welcome bonus. Okay, bye.